Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to go over how many cold calling leads you need to get a contract. So when we talk about leads, these are individuals that say, yes, I'm interested in selling. They could be cold, warm, or hot. It's just not people that come through that say, hey, I want 85 cents or 50 cents on the dollar. So that's one key important takeaway that we want to mention here. And also, too, guys, we're cold calling. And just one thing to note is that majority of your cold calling leads are going to be cold, hence the name cold calling. But I'm a big proponent of cold calling just because I believe it's the absolute most economical way to generate a lot of leads, not only for today, but for future months through follow-up. And also you can get really targeted with the leads that come through where you don't get a lot of junk as long as you're doing your market analysis and list pulling properly. So today we are going to go over cold calling benchmarks, list pulling benchmarks, and also KPIs for cold calling, just some common ones that I track and I encourage you to track as well. So let's talk about benchmarks here. Benchmarks, guys, are basically just reference points that you use to compare your performance with that of others. So they are what you're aiming for. If you want to go from, let's just say, North Carolina to Miami, Florida, and you say, I need to get on the interstate and I need to go to I-95 South. You can get there without putting your GPS in, but do you have an actual path on where to go? Like, do you actually know what you're aiming for at each hour and every 30 minutes? Do you know if you're on the right track? So benchmarks keep us on the right track. So essentially, they're what you're aiming for. A lot of wholesalers don't know what they're aiming for. So they may say cold calling doesn't work, texting doesn't work, direct mail, etc. doesn't work. Well, I may say to them, well, how many cold calls have you done? How many connections did you get? How long were you cold calling? And they may say, well, I was dialing the same list for, 3 months and I was calling for about 2 to 3 hours out of the day, maybe less than that sporadically. That's not going to get it done. Okay. So if you don't realize how much volume you should be doing, if you're not doing enough, you may say this doesn't work because you're simply not giving yourself enough opportunity to close a deal over 30 days. And that's what we're going to be focusing on here. How many leads you need to generate a contract over 30 days. We don't want to spread this thing out over 6 months. I can say, yeah, you can cold call an hour a day for 6 months, and it's going to take you 6 months to generate 100 leads. Who wants to wait that long? Of course, you're going to say it doesn't work. Who's going to sit there and do that and expect to see results? You're just going to say, well, this doesn't work. I'm not seeing any results. So we want to make sure we're doing enough volume and we're doing enough to give us an opportunity to contract a property over 30 days. So before we talk about the cold calling metrics and list pulling metrics, let's go ahead and talk about something that's very important here that I see a lot of new investors struggle with. And that's focusing on very niche lists. So you can see on this graph here on the left, I have very high quality lists. So stacked lists, driving for dollars lists, probates, inheritance lists, liens, like a lien list. That's a big one that a lot of wholesalers focus on. Absentee lists. And you may say, well, those are high quality lists. Let's focus on those. What happens after you call all those lists and they stop producing leads? So let me give you an example. If you pull all of the absentee records in your market and they have high equity on them and you dial that list for a month, let's just say it's 20,000 records. You get through that list in a month. And then month 2, you still try to dial it, but instead of generating 3 to 5 leads a day, it's generating 1 here, 1 there. You're down to 5 leads potentially for the week with that list instead of generating 5 leads a day. That's not good. A lot of investors don't know which list to target after that, so they just dial the same list over and over and over again. I'm here to tell you, once the list stops performing, shelf it. It's literally not going to do anything for you. Just sit it on the shelf. You got to pull new data. Don't shoot the messenger, guys. This is just how the numbers are shaking out. This is what I'm seeing. And this is literally what's happening right now in the real estate industry. You constantly need to be pulling new data. I heard a statistic, and I'm pretty sure this is true. Over the course of 30 days, 30% of your phone numbers will go bad. So if you try to dial that list over and over and over again, you're just going to get more and more wrong numbers. So we need to pull new data every single month. So the more targeted or niche your list is, the smaller it is and the less leads it will yield. So you may say, well, I was able to get a deal out of a absentee code violations high equity list and it was like 500 records or maybe 1,000 records, great. But do you have 500 to 1,000 unique records coming on that same list the next month? Are you going to be dialing the same list? Just because you got that amount of deals out of the first time you dialed it does not mean if you dial it again, it's going to yield the same results. This is where majority of wholesalers go wrong. And I see it over and over again. And it's a little bit frustrating because if they only make this tweak here and understand this, it's just, they just don't know. You probably don't know this. So if you only make this tweak here and you pull new data and you stop focusing on these niche lists, you're going to have a much better opportunity to have longevity in your wholesaling company. And that's the approach I take. I don't really target these niche lists. I may throw in like 1,000 records here or there out of my whole 10,000 or 20,000 record list I'm dialing for a month, but I'm not relying solely on that. And I encourage you not to get hooked on that, meaning do not even start off with dialing these niche lists, because what's going to happen is you're going to get spoiled. And once that list stops producing and then you have to do a more broader list, let's just say you're hitting up owner occupants, you're going to say, man, these leads are low quality, they're not good. And then cold calling sucks or text messaging sucks. My market's too competitive. When in actuality, that's really the norm. It's not normal to contract one deal out of 45 properties. You can do it, but that's a very manual process. If you want to scale to 3 to 5 deals a month consistently, which will generate anywhere from, 30K to maybe 50K on average for your investment company, there is no way you're going to be able to do that through targeting niche lists. You're just not going to be able to generate enough leads doing that. I mean, it could get you 1 or 2 deals sporadically, maybe every other month. Awesome, but it's not going to sustain your company full time. That's like you owning a restaurant franchise and you doing everything. You may be able to do 80% of the work, like flip the burgers, work the register, do the accounts payable, run the books, and then, clean up the lobby. You may be able to sustain that for a month or 2, but you're going to get burnt out. So it's the same way here. You can pull these niche lists, you can drive for dollars, but there's going to be a point where that's just not going to work with getting to the next level in your company. A lot of people want to try to avoid spending money. I don't know what business model you can make tens of thousands of dollars, literally. I know there was a young lady I spoke with, I pulled a list for. She made $23,000 on her first deal out of a list I pulled her. How was she able to do that? Yes, she's been trying to get her first deal for a long time, but that's 23 grand. But she had to put in an investment of about $2,000 to $3,000 with generating that list, marketing to it, skip tracing it. But that payoff was there. So, when you first start off, you may say, well, I don't have any money. Guys, if it's important to you, if you want to make checks like that, then put some money behind your marketing. But I've also noticed is that investors, especially new investors, are uncomfortable with spending the money because they just don't know what to spend it on. So hopefully by me creating these videos and getting the word out, you guys can get more clarity on what to spend your money on, and you can be more confident whenever you do it. I think that's probably the biggest issue, rather than people just like wanting to hold on to their money for the sake of it and do things cheaply. I think there's just too much information out here and it's too ambiguous and not clear. So a lot of investors say, well, I tried this didn't work, and I don't want to sit here and spend all my money on things that may not work. So I'm here to give you guys absolute clarity on what you need to know in order to put together a successful marketing campaign. So let's talk about benchmarks for lists. What should we be aiming for with our marketing list? So when you're cold calling, you really want to have a 10,000 record list that you are marketing to for a month. It's just the numbers, the way they shake out is 10,000 records will get you 1 deal as long as you're putting enough manpower behind it to generate enough leads over the course of 30 days, right? So you can have a 10,000 record list and only dial it once a day and generate a lead a week. That's going to put you on that 6-month trajectory to close your first deal, right? So it's super important to understand that if you have too many cold callers dialing the same list, like a low number of records, let's use that example of a 500 to 1,000 record niche list, you're actually going to cause more damage on your list. You're going to end up blowing through it too quickly. There's a balance here. So you don't want to put, 5 cold callers on only a 10,000 record list. You'll generate some leads, you'll generate a lot of leads, but by that third or fourth day, it'll stop performing. And when it comes to cold calling, especially your list, you want them to last for a longer time, because if you go through all the records and you blow through all of them in a couple of days, you're going to basically screw yourself out of sellers that won't pick up today, but may pick up in 3 weeks from now, may pick up on 4 weeks from now. If they're all calling the same list and then that seller is seen as not interested, or they get marked as DNC because you're blowing them up, you don't have an opportunity of catching that seller maybe in 2 or 3 weeks when they want to speak to you, because you're trying to get all the leads now. You're trying to go through the list as quick as possible. That is not suggested at all. So we want to pace ourselves here. And we also know that 10,000 records with one cold caller is about as much as I would put on that list. 2 cold callers maximum on a 10,000 record list. But your dialer settings really have to be optimized, or else you're going to see a decrease in results as far as lead flow after your second week of dialing that list. So the formula I use is 10,000 records with one cold caller, dialing it for 8 hours per day, 5 days a week, will yield about 40 leads. So what does that mean? If we want 80 leads, we want to have 2 cold callers dialing a 20,000 record list. You see what we're doing there? And that's going to yield 80 leads or more, right? I'm just using averages. Some of you guys may say, well, I can generate 5 to 8 leads a day. Okay, great. That's awesome. I'm just telling you what the benchmark should be on a daily basis. And we're going to go over more the cold calling benchmarks in the next slide here. Another thing to note here is that if your list is more niche, like an absentee code violations list or a vacant water shutoff list, then you're likely going to generate more leads. But just know that this isn't the norm. And it may take you less leads to generate a contract. It may take you 30 or 40. But don't get discouraged if you pull a broader list and you're like, man, it's taking me 200 leads to get a contract. That's the norm, right? Because you either have 2 options here. You can go into another market and then pull these very niche lists. And then as soon as you pull them, you could pull out of the market. And then you have to do that same thing over and over again in every single market, which sounds very frustrating, especially if you don't have buyers. It's very difficult to uproot yourself and then go in a virtual market. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So that's not a sustainable business model. What's more sustainable is that you open up your criteria a little bit. I'm not saying that your criteria is going to be super broad, where it's just like single family residences that bought houses in 2015 and prior. We're not doing that, right? We have other filters on our list. But when it comes down to it, we need to know that these niche lists are not the norm, because we're going to run out of them. Like I said, you may have 30 or 40,000 code violations, but after those records are up, that's it. So we need to realize that more niche lists, not necessarily a good thing, because it's not sustainable. And lastly, to tie it up here on this slide, is that a mistake I see new wholesalers make is that they get frustrated when they get a lot of leads out of a targeted list. And then when the list isn't as targeted, like I just said, it doesn't produce the same quantity or quality of leads. So they get frustrated and they say, man, this cold calling stuff used to work, but it doesn't now. They just need more leads because that list isn't as targeted. I really need to drive that point home. Not every list is created equally. A driving for dollars list or PPC leads, you're going to need way less leads in order to close a deal with those. But that can be very expensive, or it could be a crapshoot, or it could take a lot of your time. Driving for dollars, I mean, I'm telling you, to get enough properties where you're able to get a decent list together, skip trace that list, and then individually call those sellers, that takes a lot of work just to get one deal. That is just not sustainable if you're doing it yourself. Now, you could build a process around that, but I would just say that it's just a lot easier to cold call and outsource that rather than try to build a process around driving for dollars. So the key takeaway here, guys, is that different lists vary in how many leads they produce in their quantity and quality. So let's talk about benchmarks for cold calling campaigns. The main key performance indicators that we track for cold calling campaigns are daily leads generated per cold caller. So how many leads did each cold caller generate? And daily connections per cold caller. So how many connections did they have? Now, each dialer tool classifies connections as different things. But these are basically, if somebody picks up and they hang up. In ZenCall, they classify that as a voicemail as well. Or if, you actually have a sufficient conversation with somebody that's over 30 seconds to a minute long, right? So typically, you're going to be getting 1 to 3 leads a day per cold caller for an 8-hour shift. Like I said, in your market, once you start dialing your list, it may be 5 leads a day. You need to determine what these benchmarks are for yourself. But if you don't know what you're aiming for, you can start here. So if you say, man, like my cold callers are producing 1 lead every 2 days or every 3 days, that's not going to cut it. I'm here to tell you that they're underperforming. And so, right now, if they're doing that, you need to either evaluate your script, the list that you're pulling, and probably it comes down to how fresh your list is. You're probably having them dial an old list of like 2,000 records, and that's on you. You need to give them enough data, fresh data for them to dial so they can have a chance to generate these leads. So don't just put it on them and say that they suck as a cold caller. So 1 to 3 leads a day for an 8-hour shift is the average for a Filipino virtual assistant / cold caller, which is probably what most of you all are going to be using for cold calling as well. So this number will vary based on the cold caller's experience and, like I said, how fresh the list is. But even if they're not that experienced, to be honest, guys, cold calling is not that difficult to do. We put our guys through a 1-day training and then we'll let them start cold calling. It's not that difficult. And most cold callers last for about 2 to 3 months of that. So you don't want to sit there and, really train these guys day in, day out, because the attrition rate's just really high. And it's, you just don't want to sit there and have these guys train every day. And then you're just like left with nothing because they leave with all that information that you gave them. So we aim to get them on board really quickly and for them to just start calling. And then we make tweaks and edits along the way. Based off of what we hear on the recordings when they're talking to sellers. So another thing to note is that if you've been dialing a small list for several weeks, then your lead flow decreases. Isn't necessarily a reflection on how good your cold caller's performance is. Meaning, if you've been dialing a list for 3 weeks and there's only 5,000 records on it, and the lead flow goes from 2 to 3 leads a day to 1 a day, or maybe 1 every other day, that should tell you that your list is probably ready to be exchanged out for a fresher one. So not everything goes back to how the cold callers are performing. I just see new wholesalers, even intermediate wholesalers, they make that mistake with thinking that everything is everybody else's fault. And we have to take ownership as owners of our companies and realize that if our callers aren't performing well, if our employees aren't performing well, we have to figure out if it's an issue that we have to fix ourselves, like what we're providing the cold callers, or if it's a training issue on their end. So let's talk about benchmarks for daily connections per cold caller. About 250 to 400 connections for an 8-hour shift. That's really decent. If they have above 500 connections, meaning they have 600 connections per cold caller or 700, that's an indication that your list is being blown through too quickly. You have to look at your dialer settings at that point because they're going through the list too quickly, especially if they're not generating a high volume of leads. So if they're calling or they're connecting with 500 to 600 people a day and they're only generating 1 lead, then that's an issue because their connections are high, but they're not yielding any more leads. So they're basically just wasting your list and running through it. I suggest pausing your campaign, calling your dialer, and figuring out what the issue is at that point. It's very important that you do this because instead of one list lasting for a month, if you don't fix that issue and they keep on dialing 600-700 connections a day, then your list may only last for 2 weeks. Then you have to pull more data, and that's just not economical at that point. So let's go to the question that all you guys are here for, and I'll give you guys an answer. You guys know what benchmarks are. You're familiar with the KPIs that we track for our marketing campaigns, for our cold calling campaigns. So how many leads do we need to get a contract? So let me preface this by saying this. 95% of your leads are going to be cold. They're cold calling leads, guys. So meaning that 5% of your leads are going to be ready to sell in 30 days. This doesn't mean that we're going to throw away those 95% of the leads. Because guys, the fortune is in the follow-up. I can't tell you how many leads and deals I've closed through follow-up. I mean, majority of my deals come from follow-up. Now, we're going to put a marketing campaign together that gives you the best opportunity of closing a deal in 30 days. So you're going to be able to maximize your marketing budget and you're going to get a return on your investment. But realize that you need to have a follow-up system in place where these 95% of leads, there's going to be another 5-10% of those that may turn into warm or hot leads over the course of 60, 90, and 120 days through follow-up. So just because somebody says no today or they want retail today, guys, that does not mean they want retail or it's a no forever. Seriously, guys, I'm telling you, follow-up is so important. It's not the coolest thing to talk about. It's not the most fun thing to do. It's really not, guys, but it doesn't take that much time out of your day to do this. You're literally only calling somebody, once a month and just touching base for 5 minutes just to see if they change their price or if anything in their life changed, right? They may have had a spouse that died. They may have suddenly decided to retire. They may have decided to pick up and move to a different state. You don't know, and you won't know this until you call them. That's why you have to keep them in the pipeline. Just touch base. When you get off the phone with them, before you get off the phone with them on your initial call or maybe the last call you're going to have in a couple months, just say, hey, Mr. Seller, can I follow up with you in a couple of months just to see if your situation changed? Most people will say yes. Boom, put them on a 1 to 2 month follow-up. Who knows? Something may happen where they're like, you know what? I want to sell this house now, and you've been the main one keeping in communication with me. Let's go ahead and do it. So follow-up is really big here, guys. But to close a deal in the next 30 days, you're really going to need 80 to 160 leads. I'm leaning closer to that 160 lead mark. Above 100, it just depends on your market and it depends on your experience level, right? If you're new and you don't have a buyer's list and when leads come through, you don't have a buyer in mind for when they come through and you're like, I don't know if I could do something with that. Then at that point, it may take you 160 or 200 leads to close a deal. Now, if you're experienced and you have a buyer's list and let's just say some lots come through, vacant lots, vacant land, or some properties where you're like, okay, this might be something that I can work with, but you have a buyer in mind for the deal and it's just like one buyer that will buy in that particular area at that price, you're obviously going to be able to do more with the 80 leads or 100 leads that come through than a new investor. Like I said, guys, these are just averages. These are just general benchmarks that I've seen and I've witnessed, but it takes about 80 to 160. So if you're not generating this amount of leads and you only have 4 or 5 leads that you're calling, guys, you're not giving yourself enough opportunity to generate a contract. You're just not. You don't say cold calling doesn't work. Don't say your list sucks. It might suck, but don't say that your cold callers suck. Don't say that any of this stuff doesn't work because it works for me. It works for thousands of other investors. Why isn't it working for you? You probably just don't know how many records you should be dialing, how many records you should be pulling, how often you should be pulling your records. But we went over that. So now you guys have a blueprint to follow. So you could take all this stuff that I said in the video, make tweaks. And if you're not hitting those benchmarks that I indicated in this video, then of course you're not going to generate a contract in 30 days. Now, if you are, and you're still not getting any motivated seller leads or nothing potentially to work with, then we might have to look at your list pool or your skip tracing service, or it could be your cold callers. But for the most part, if you follow these rules of thumb here, this could get you over halfway there. And you're going to get some opportunity out of 100 leads. As long as you're qualifying them right, 80 to 160 leads, you're going to be fine. And there's going to be somebody there that wants to sell for pennies on a dollar. The last thing I want to state is that these numbers may seem higher than other marketing channels, but like I said earlier in the video, cold calling allows us to generate several leads to follow up with the next month and the month afterwards. So just because we're generating one deal out of 30 days with this, you're going to be generating deals going forward as long as you're following up with these leads, and you're giving yourself plenty of opportunity to do that. So imagine if you generated 100 leads a month for 3 months and you're following up with 300 sellers. Guys, come on. Even if the sellers are cold, that just gives us more opportunity than if we were to text. You're not generating nearly enough leads or nearly the same amount of leads with texting than you would with cold calling. Like I said, texting is good, just like niche lists are good when you first start off, but they're not scalable and sustainable. Texting is good to supplement your cold calling, but I would not depend on that to be your bread and butter, just because it's difficult to outsource. I mean, unless you're sitting there and you have somebody that's actually an American who understands how to respond back to these responses, and this is a video for another day, I highly don't suggest trying to build your whole company around texting. Maybe a couple years ago, but not now. So guys, let's tie it all together. We need to focus on volume if you're cold calling. If you're dialing a 2,000 record list or 500 record list, that's not going to cut it. If it's a super niche list like a code violations, absentee list, something like that, you may be able to get away with it, but just realize that's not the norm. After you run out of those records, what are you going to do at that point? You can't just focus on niche lists. You have to focus on more broad lists with different criteria on it. Owner occupied, things of that nature, right? There's some motivation on those lists, but you have to add some filters there to cause it to be even more motivated, right? 10,000 records is a minimum number of records you should give one cold caller for a month. Don't put 5 cold callers on a 10,000 record list. Don't pull anything less than 10,000 records. You're going to get frustrated because your lead flow is going to start dipping down probably after the first week. So it doesn't matter how targeted your list is, how niche it is. It's all a numbers game. If you're dialing 500 records, guys, 500 records, I can go through that in a day. I could have a cold caller go through that half a day. It doesn't matter how niche it is. You could call it. It's not going to produce any more leads after you run through it a few times. That's just what it is, guys. That's just the name of the game right now. So you should be pulling fresh data every single month. And don't continue to dial a non-performing list. As soon as your list stops performing, don't try to force it. Guys, just pull another list. Budget 10,000 records in your marketing campaign and your marketing budget every single month. So it's a great way to waste your marketing budget if you are dialing a poor performing list. I mean, if you just want to throw money out the window, go ahead and just have 4 or 5 cold callers dial a 2,000 record list for several months and watch it not generate any leads. I mean, I'm serious. I'm joking. I'm being facetious, but that's what the majority of wholesalers I speak with are doing. So hopefully this gives you guys some confidence into how to tweak your marketing campaigns and gets you on the right path. I hope the best for all you guys. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. A quick note here, guys, is that if you need quick and immediate help, we are your team to help you get to your goals. If you want to bypass all this stuff with trying to figure it out yourself, we have solutions for you. And we are your one-stop shop for all your real estate marketing needs. You should go ahead and just say, if I'm wholesaling, I'm a real estate marketer. This is the absolute foundation of wholesaling. It's marketing, guys. So we can pull a custom list for you in your market. I conduct all the market analysis for my clients, and I determine the best zip codes and areas to target in your market. And you will get a unique list of 10,000 records that will be unique to you and only you. And you can get more information about that at the URL listed, ccgarlandmarketing.com/list pooling. And all these links are in the description. We also offer one-on-one mentorship. So if you want to work with me one-on-one, you can go to ccgarlandmarketing.com/one-on-one mentorship. With this, we make sure you guys are right and straight within a month. Really, you only need about a month to work with me. Some people stay on for 2 months, but my goal is to get you all the information you need and to set you up on your goals in a month. That's been really valuable. You get unlimited email support, 5 coaching calls a month, and you get access to over 20 hours of content. I don't give you all the 20 hours of content at once. It's just based off of what you need assistance with. Like if you want to build out a cold calling team, I'll send you that module. So I give it to you bit by bit. I don't overwhelm you with stuff. And I give you exact advice as to how to get to your goals. We do a diagnostic on the first discovery call, and then I tell you exactly the steps to take. There's no ambiguous advice here. It is literally exact advice. And I encourage you to bring all your questions along and ask me anything you have, because I want you to have clarity, take you from a beginner or intermediate investor, wholesaler to an expert in 30 days. That's my commitment to you. Also, if you want to know the exact process I use to generate thousands of seller leads each year, I created a course for you all called the Motivated Seller Marketing Academy. You can click the link in the description to go there to check out that course. But that's my whole process with generating motivated seller leads. I leave no stone unturned. Have gotten a lot of good reviews on that and changed a lot of businesses with that content as well. So guys, it was great chatting with you guys today. I hope you guys learned something and can take something away from this. I look forward to getting back on YouTube. I know it's been a while, and giving you guys some great content. Until then, you guys stay safe, and I hope you guys are crushing it in your businesses.